Hey, welcome back, guys. Nate Parker's new film, entitled American Skjn, is an interesting expose on race relations, specifically pertaining to Black people versus the police. The film follows the story of Lincoln Jefferson, a U.S. Marine veteran who loses his son at the hands of a white police officer during a routine traffic stop. Following this tragic loss and subsequent inaction by the system, Lincoln is forced to attain justice by any means. In today's video, we'll be fully reviewing the film and provide analysis throughout. Before we begin, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and bell notification to immediately receive these videos. Also, big thank you to all of my channel donors. If you'd like to be the next one, drop $1 on that Cash App for us. Lastly, a spoiler alert is now in effect for all things American Skjn. Here we go. It's important to note that the narrative plays out like a film within a film, as its contents are documented by young independent filmmaker Jordan King, portrayed by Shane Paul McGee, who you might recognize from Greenleaf fame. The movie literally starts with that classic old school countdown, with King's name to the left and the title American Skjn Graduate Thesis to the right. This is significant because everything we witness afterwards is due to King's cinematography, as directed by Jefferson. The movie starts with the traffic stop, dated July 3rd, 2017. The date here isn't by chance, as it's literally the day before Americans celebrate their independence. The fact that the tragedy occurs during this time is a nuanced touch by Parker, whose character is on his way home in the scene and stopped just short of freedom by the cops. Two police officers stop Lincoln and his son, accusing the former of speeding and lacking valid insurance. The cops direct Lincoln to step out of the car, to which he complies. While outside, his son, Skjn Jefferson, pulls his phone out and begins recording. The second cop, Officer Mike Randall, furiously directs Skjn to put his phone away, to no avail. He pulls his gun out, but this maneuver only emboldens the young Jefferson to keep recording. Officer Randall tosses Skjn towards the back of the car, and then the scene cuts to black. The next shot we see is of Jordan King, the aforementioned filmmaker, paying Lincoln a visit at his home. The traffic stop is now a year old, and a seemingly withdrawn Lincoln answers the door. He allows Jordan entry to begin filming and documenting his story in hopes that it'll reach a mass audience. Jordan asks if he'll say his name for all to see, to which our main character replies, Lincoln Jefferson. This name is not accidental in the slightest, and on the contrary, heavy in nature. You see, Lincoln Jefferson is named after America's two largest representatives of liberation, Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson. Abraham Lincoln, as we well know, is credited with freeing enslaved Africans on January 1st, 1863. Comparably, Thomas Jefferson was a founding father who penned arguably America's most important freedom document, the Declaration of Independence. The irony of the names are glaring, because although Lincoln and Jefferson did much good in the effort of American liberation, Black people under their respective rulerships suffered mightily. Jefferson was tyrannical in his treatment towards Black people, owning more than 600 enslaved Africans throughout his lifetime, and fostering an infamous relationship with a young girl named Sally Hemings, who the histories have tried to elevate to the status of an adult woman. Contrary to this falsehood, Hemings was 14 when Jefferson took control over her, and he was 44. Lincoln, while not as salacious as Jefferson, on paper anyway, still betrayed the American ethos. He never saw Blacks as deserving of the same rights as white Americans. In fact, his claim to fame as the great emancipator was tainted when you do your research, as only slaves within states under armed rebellion were allowed to be released in an effort to help the Union cripple the Confederacy. Furthermore, Lincoln was quoted as stating that if the Union and slavery could be simultaneously preserved, he would do just that. The irony of our protagonist being named for these two figures is that although he's in a country that professes liberty, tyranny is the order of the day if you're the wrong color. His subsequent actions mirror what true Americanism is supposed to display unprovoked, though begotten by tyrannical means via hostages and armed rebellion. An example of yet another poetic display by Parker. As Jordan interviews Lincoln, the latter depicts the brighter side of his son's life and journey. He talks with Lincoln's mother, who offers another perspective on KJ, fatherhood, and the mistreatment of Black vets once they return home from the service. We then get some pop culture references that further allow us an understanding of Lincoln's son, including Gucci Mane, Lil Uzi Vert, Meek Mill, Lorraine Hansberry, and Malcolm X, the latter of which is a Spike Lee mainstay. Speaking of Spike Lee, his thumb is on the pulse of the film as an unofficial producer, backer, and presenter. Some of the musical choices throughout are reminiscent of Lee's previous works, especially the more jazz-induced segments. It's something about those horns that convey raw emotion in the purest form. KJ's Room provides further insight into his personality for Jordan, along with commentary from Lincoln regarding his divorce from his wife and how it may have affected his son. There's an interesting scene following King's question on whether Lincoln ever spoke to his son about the cops, what we in Black society refer to as the talk. A flashback reveals KJ on a live stream with a friend breaking down the lawful rights of citizens when encountered by the police. Lincoln, while agreeing with his son's assertions, stressed the importance of complying with law enforcement at all costs, sparking confusion in his radicalized son. Lincoln further explained that although the law may state certain things, those laws weren't written with Black people in mind, and making it home alive supersedes ineffective words that could be rendered as such by a single bullet. This is an unfortunate contradiction that Black households are faced with when teaching our children about racial pride and survival, and the fine line that separates the two. A child doesn't register contradictions like adults do. Saying one thing, doing another, and playing the game may be lost on someone who's unaware of just how insidious the nation in which they live can be. However, it's a lesson that must be ingrained, and Lincoln wasn't wrong for attempting to make the distinction. Next, we meet Lincoln's friend and brother-in-arms, Durwood, who's portrayed by the legendary ghost man himself, Omari Hardwick. Durwood is also a veteran, having served with Lincoln in Iraq. He's also suffering from cancer, choosing to live with his condition as opposed to suffering through the harmful treatments. As I mentioned in my Spell movie review a while back, the ghost man is superb in just about everything he's in, and this portrayal is no different. After Durwood's appearance, the Jefferson flock heads over to the courthouse to await the grand jury's decision to pursue charges against Officer Randall. They predictably choose to let the officer walk, as well as reinstate him to the force. This state of affairs causes further turmoil within Lincoln and his family. As a result, the community takes to the streets and riots occur, similar to real-life fallouts from police killings. Then, the Black police chief is sent to try and sway KJ's mother into calling for peace in order to subside the violence, which she ultimately capitulates to. This also mirrors the many families who've been coerced into making public pleas for peace over the years. Distraught, heartbroken, and all out of options, Lincoln decides to create the justice in which he was deprived. He convinces his independent film crew to follow him and his comrades into an open war zone against the police. Once inside, Lincoln and his team commandeer all members of the precinct, including the culprit of his son's murder. After flirting with the idea of killing Officer Randall, Lincoln comes up with an even better plan. He sets up the station as a mock courthouse, placing himself as the prosecutor, the truculent Officer Dominic Reyes as Randall's defense attorney, and nonviolent prisoners as the jury. If found innocent, Lincoln agreed to release the officer and turn himself in. However, if guilty, Link would decide the officer's fate the gun-fashioned way. Over the course of the quote-unquote trial, Lincoln relived the events of that horrific night, and we're finally shown the execution of KJ, something that hadn't been explicitly depicted to this point. This is arguably one of the most interesting aspects of Parker's narrative, as the trial wasn't just partial to the victims of police violence, but offered the enforcers of law a chance to voice their perspectives on the burdens of proper policing, however biased it may have seemed to onlookers. This is something that's rarely considered in tragedies inspired by police encounters. The fine line between outright victimization and fatal misunderstandings were explored in full and presented in such a way that the viewer is left with just as big as a decision as the fall jury. The issues of so-called black-on-black crime, sexism, racism, and white supremacy are called to the table of accountability as well during the heated, unorthodox discourse. Officer Reyes, Randall's unofficial defense attorney, had an interesting exchange with a Latino inmate during the trial. Interestingly enough, Reyes espoused more whitewashed ideologies in contrast to his own kind, and the argument with his Hispanic counterpart highlighted that. The latter choosing to address him in Spanish exclusively as opposed to English to further drive home this point. Side note, if any of my Hispanic subscribers could translate the inmate's condemnations, this commentator would greatly appreciate it. It sounded like he was giving Reyes that work in Espanol. enough to get him out of his seat in a rage. But moving right along, a mild scuffle interrupts the progressive debate, resulting in Link's uncle being shot and Jordan being placed as the 12th juror. The jury then deliberates on Randall's verdict. After a moving session, highlighted by Jordan's perspective, the jury finds Randall guilty. The disgraced officer is then forced to get on his knees and contact his wife and son before execution. He does, leaving his wife in shambles at the thought of losing her husband. Lincoln then cocks his gun and places it to Randall's head, causing an uproar. When he pulls the trigger, it turns out that the clip is empty, inspiring remorse in the previously unapologetic officer. Link then states, quote, "That indescribable feeling I've been carrying for a year and a half? Now you know," end quote. Randall and others begin to sob profusely, and he formally apologizes to Link for his role in killing his son. This maneuver surprised the collective, as Lincoln's plan is finally unveiled. It was never about killing the cops or getting violent retribution, but instead, forcing them to see the error of their ways through armed yet organized dissent. This theme speaks to the combination of Dr. King and Malcolm X's philosophies, the former an apostle of peaceful struggle, and the latter a proponent of gaining that peace, even if it meant war. Lincoln releases all hostages following this mercy and resolves himself to his fate. Officer Randall then asks to walk out with Lincoln, not as an enemy, but as an ally. They do just that. However, while heading out the door, Lincoln is fatally shot by the SWAT team awaiting on the outside. The movie's epilogue shows several biased media reports on the nature of Lincoln's rebellion, some outright lying on the endeavor. Then, we're shown Jordan, who occupied the true account of the revolutionary event in his graduate thesis, American Skjn. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. The documentary aspect initially caught me off guard, but it was rounded out well towards the end. The film is divided into 3 acts: the murder, the trial, and the verdict. The idea of a black man administering the terms of justice after being denied such a right was unique and humanized his son past the point of being just another hashtag. Though the media's dismissal of Lincoln's life at the end was a reminder that said humanization is on us, lest it be circumvented by the powers that be. In the final summation, Lincoln Jefferson was the inconvenient hero, as defined by Carl Wendell Hines Jr. in his poem on the aforementioned Dr. King. Hines beautifully conveyed that, quote, "Dead men make such convenient heroes, for they cannot rise to challenge the images that we might fashion from their lives." In murdering Link, the system's hope was that they'd control his narrative. After all, he wasn't a loving father at the crossroads of anguish and despair. No, he was a mentally disturbed malcontent who couldn't accept law and order as dictated by the lawless and the disorderlies. Jordan King was his saving grace in thwarting the media's effort here. It's implied that Lincoln knew he wouldn't survive the siege, but his message had to be carried out by someone, and Jordan was the perfect emissary of justice. He was young enough to push the fight forward and practical enough not to abuse such a responsibility. In the end, Lincoln Jefferson embodied Dr. King's timeless quote, "A man who does not have something for which he is willing to die is not fit to live." The arrival of the film, on a day in which we commemorate his life and mission, is as poetic as it is timely, especially considering the film's conclusion, another acknowledgement of the good doctor's tireless efforts towards a better world. But what did you think? How do you assess Nate Parker's latest work? And what are some of the correlations you noticed between this fictionalized story and the actual events that inspired it? Be sure to drop me your thoughts in the comments below. As always, I thank you for watching today's video. If you liked today's video, go ahead and drop $1 on that Cash App for us, hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more content such as this. This is Rudy P. Magic of Rudy P. Magic Beats, and have a blessed one until the next one. Peace, y'all.